Hi, everyone. I want to talk about a very different kind of book, one that operates both through material history and ritual rather than theology alone. This is the book, The Head of God by Keith Laidler. Pull it back a bit. Keith Laidler was a BBC documentary producer and an anthropologist trained to study symbolism, ritual practice, and the ways sacred meaning is preserved outside official doctrine. He was not a fringe writer, and he was not interested in sensational claims. His work consistently explores what happens when religious history leaves traces that institutions later struggle to explain. In The Head of God, Laidler examined one of the most persistent elements of the Knights Templar trials, repeated references to sacred heads. Popular retellings usually reduce this to a single mysterious object, often described as heretical or grotesque. Laidler, returning to the trial records themselves, found that the truth of the matter was far more complex. Across different regions and different Templar houses or preceptories, witnesses described more than one head. Some were wrapped in cloth, some adorned, some hidden, and others were revealed during rituals practiced by the Templars. These accounts appear again and again, not as isolated imagination, but as repeated testimony across Europe. Laidler did not interpret these heads as demonic idols. Instead, he understood them as symbols of lineage and authority. In many ancient traditions, the head represents continuity, inheritance, and the transmission of sacred power. When read this way, the Templar heads begin to look less like forbidden objects and more like markers of a suppressed sacred tradition. What becomes particularly important is that these heads appear to point to something the institutional church could not fully control. They were not random relics. They were signs of continuity, suggesting that the authority did not flow exclusively through the structures that later dominated Christendom. Laidler did not attempt to give final answers, and that restraint is one of the strengths of the book. But once you recognize that the Templars guarded multiple heads, the entire narrative shifts. The question is no longer whether something was being hidden, but what kind of inheritance was being preserved and why it provoked such fear. I speak to that inheritance in my own book, Stone of the Savior, The Return of the She-Christ. The Head of God opens a door rather than closing it. It invites the reader to reconsider what the Templars were really guarding, who that guardianship ultimately honored, and why that story could not be allowed to remain visible. For anyone interested in the deeper structures beneath Christian history, especially the ways authority was transmitted and contained, this book remains an essential key. I hope you find it as interesting as I did. My name is Lori Paris, and welcome to She Life.